Welcome back to the Meeting Mastery podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Frampton, the CEO and co-founder of SalesQ, and we have a super special guest with us today, Evan, VP of Sales over at CommerceBear, who actually managed me for the majority of my career. So, Evan, super excited to have you on the podcast today.
I appreciate it, Ryan. Thank you for the opportunity.
Love it. I'm not sure if you've been able to check in on any of the episodes yet, but essentially what we do here on the Meeting Mastery podcast is we like to go a little bit one step deeper than what the LinkedIn profile says. Everybody checks out your LinkedIn profile. They're going to see that you were early on at TouchBistro and have climbed your way up the ranks from Vidyard, now at CommerceBear as a VP of Sales and Marketing. You've had an incredible career building a lot of phenomenal sales organizations, but I'm curious about the harder times, the times where decisions weren't so obvious to you. I have one in the back of my head that I know a lot of reps ask me about career development, which is when I go from an IC, do I take a BDR manager role or a sales manager role? Is one going to put me on a certain track that I'm not going to be able to get away from? I know you have some stronger opinions about that. And I've seen it for myself, break those norms that most people would tell you to avoid. I'm curious, like, what was that choice for you like in your career, and how did you go about making that shift from IC to sales leader?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. That's a great question, Ryan. And I think a lot of people put a lot of thought into like exactly where they should go and why. I think one of the things, and you and I saw a lot of this together in managing the team that we led at Vidyard, it's very rare that somebody's own thought process or desires of their own personal growth is going to match what the business needs. And when that happens, it's beautiful and it's super easy if everything is aligns in that manner. But it's actually really rare for somebody to say, okay, I want to become a sales leader. So I'm going to work really hard as an account executive, typically speaking, and then I'm going to go and apply and get that sales leader role. It's well, all of a sudden there is no sales leader role because it's already filled and that person's doing a good job. Well, we have a BD leader role. So now what do you do? There's that crossroads. I think the thing that I led with in my career that got me to where I am today is just look for an opportunity to build more business for the business you represent. And I think that's where you look at the most successful people who sell, they will make it about the customer. It's like, what is it that you're trying to do? And then if I make commission off that, great. But you can't think about yourself first. When I first got into sales leadership, business development leadership, my first opportunity to do that was TouchBistro. I did not say to myself, I wanted to be a leader. What I saw was a void in the business where they needed to build out a business development org. I started doing that. From there, the natural progression was like, Evan, you filled this void. It only makes sense you now go hire people and we make you manager. Now, the difficult point is try to get a startup to give you a manager title when you've never had one before. That's very difficult. But I think you got to look to fill the voids of the businesses early on. Once you get pedigree and merit and some tenure in leading teams, that's when you get to choose what the next opportunity looks at. But at the beginning stages, I think it's all about just fill a void for an organization and they will continue to throw more at you.
And don't sit there and decline a BD leader role because that's not what you ideally saw on your trajectory. And in the meantime, sit there not learning anything. Go out and build
Yeah.
and focus on that.
Yeah, you got it, Ryan. One of the things that I saw that is a dangerous mindset to get into for those that are early in their career in software sales is I'm not going to do that because I believe that I should be a sales manager, or I believe I should be a senior AE, or I believe my base salary should be X, Y, Z. If you just take the opportunities in front of you and you crush it, you're not going to be in that role for very long. And Ryan, you made a post last week about your progression that you and I experienced together. I don't think you held the same title for more than a year in most parts. And it was because you were filling voids and then you were learning and rising up, where there's a lot of people that I saw sitting on the sidelines just waiting for that perfect leadership role, but then they had no experience and they weren't filling voids along the way. So I think you can't be scared. I always tell people, don't think about the money you're going to make this year. Think about the money you're going to make next year.
Love it. Maybe from fast forwarding your career a little bit from when you did an incredible job at Vidyard, taking a segment where we used to turn down leads and be like, oh, it's too small, to blowing up and becoming one of the most substantial parts of the business. What caused you to go from that environment to taking on your first head of sales, VP of sales role? I think a lot of managers are out there right now thinking, am I ready for that next step? I'm curious, what's your take? How did you recognize it was the point in your career when you were ready to like make that leap and you were prepared to do so, or maybe you didn't feel you were prepared to do? And what are some learnings in that transition that, again, a lot of managers are waiting for the day where they get the crack at the first VP role?
Yeah, there's a lot in that. I think it's really identifying like who you are and what you want to do. And I think the biggest thing that scared me is that it started to get easy. Like we really created a repeatable process to drive pipeline, to close said pipeline, and how to, one of the most important parts that nobody really talks about when you're looking at a spreadsheet at a CRO level is how to attract, hire, and make that talent successful in the role. We created this playbook that actually works. Rinse and repeat. And once it got easy up top and the team was growing, it scared the shit out of me, the fact that it got so easy. And I realized that I had gotten to that place in my career because I had always pushed against the adversity. And creating that sales team at Vidyard, as you saw firsthand, wasn't easy for me. There was a lot of people who gravitated towards it, and there was a lot of people that were hoping that it would fail. But that's how I got to where I was, by finding again that void in the business to say, we can make money here. And you go tell a CEO that you can make money there, they'll give you a chance as long as you're validated. So from there, once it got easy and we had gotten through like the building aspect, I think that's when I really identified in myself, Ryan, that I'm a builder of teams, not a maintenance manager. I'm not somebody who holds merit in managing 25 people globally. I don't care about that. I care about, can I take a business and go 10x revenue in a year? Can I do that? And I think that also too, I think a lot of leaders hold a lot of merit in how much revenue they're closing, but that is a function of scale, right? Doing $1 million, $2 million quarters with your sales team, it doesn't mean that you have 2, 3 people selling for most SMB or mid-market. If you can allow yourself to identify as the builder and say, I'm okay closing 200 grand a quarter as opposed to closing $2 million a quarter, and that doesn't bother you, and you realize that there are economies of scale where investors and businesses are built off the backbone of just getting that started, that's when I think it's safe to jump and go to a early stage startup and take that risk and jump into it, because you'll find yourself getting out of bed with more vigor than when you did when the numbers were larger.
I resonate with that a lot just around my recent experiences, right? It's like as soon as you start to feel distracted or that you're not excited about your current day to day, that's actually the riskier decision to stay.
Yes.
Because what that's going to cause you to do is have not as high performance and not be as bought in. And therefore your reputation will over time reflect.
You got it.
And having the ability to articulate, no, like the riskier decision is staying, whereas the less riskier decision is like following what energizes you, no matter what that is, and just being self-aware enough to like try to actively identify. Cause I'm sure it changes all the time. I'm sure what excited you in your career 5 years ago doesn't excite you the same way like now, right? Maybe it does. You know what head of sales role, VP of sales role you want to go after. Like, what are some best practices for choosing the right role? We hear there's good VPs of sales, just like there are good startups, right? What are some questions maybe senior sales managers, directors should be asking when they're evaluating which opportunity to go to?
The relationship piece is massive. It's bigger than I could have ever imagined. Like having strong relationships with, if you're in most cases as a VP, you're reporting into your CEO or perhaps your CRO, but that would be a larger company. So let's just say CEO. It's like that relationship is so crucial. And there's going to be times when it feels really good. And there's going to be times when it feels not so good, but that's okay. You build on with the fundamentals and the foundations that you have. But pulling others in is massive. And I think that is really hard in this new remote world, which I believe wholeheartedly is here to stay. So we got to figure out how to do it. But it's really hard to pull people in who are struggling or maybe not in full agreement with your agendas and how you're pushing things forward. you've really got to work on that. And I think that's the piece that every first time VP is going to have an aha moment with. It's the idea that you go from, okay, this is about closing revenue. It's about hiring and training talent. And then it's about scaling that. But there's so much more once you do get to the executive level that has to do with influence. And what are you going to focus on? Each quarter, I write down 3 things. That's it, max 3 things that I am going to be fully focused on. And then I continually push back on certain things if they don't directly correlate to that. So, like pipeline and revenue is always on that list, but is this going to help that move that forward? And I think you got to be really careful to just fall into the pitfalls of the operational part of the job. You got to think about the relationship side that really allows you to scale.
The CEO and head of sales relationship is probably one of the most crucial in the entire company because one of you is trying to cast the vision, one of you is trying to execute the vision while keeping reality in check. And it can be rocky at times, but it also is some of the most like fulfilling relationships that you can build over time. So it's just like going in with eyes wide open around like what the reality of that is going to look like and knowing that like this person, not just company, is extremely important in my picking is crucial. And then also I found through my time, just like getting my first head of sales role, like what you think you should ask and all the recommendations, there's nothing that can compare to just like accepting your first gig at that level and just executing for the first 6 months. It tells you a lot about yourself. It tells you a
Yeah.
lot what you actually look for because until you're actually in those trenches and you're trying to make things happen, there's no way that you can actually ask the right questions.
When you're getting interviewed for a head of sales role or a VP of sales role, it's less an interview. It's very much more of a conversation. I would assume it's the same with any other executive level role. The problem is that the best CEOs are really good at recruiting. And then VPs of sales were, if you're not good at selling, kudos to you for getting as far as you did. But the, and that's a joke. But that's a weird dynamic to sit together with those 2 people who are trying to close each other, but then both are going to sit there and try to take a step back to look at it from a quantitative side and say, does this make sense? And I think it's really difficult when you put 2 people in the same room. You'll actually notice that heads of sales and CEOs typically have very much a similar personality. Whether it's like your disc profile, like wherever you fall in the disc profile, like it's pretty rare that you're going to see people who are totally polar opposites. It does happen. But I think the one thing that I always say to myself, I'm like, as time changes, as the years go on, and I go to look at perhaps joining another company once CommerceBear, like we've done that, we've taken it to the moon. I'm going to suggest to the new potential CEO, I'm going to fly in, come see you. Let's spend a weekend together. What do you like to do? You like to go ski and sightsee? What is it? Let's go do that together and just hang out. Cause I think that, and or even better, and again, these are pipe dreams, but it's, let's go travel together. Let's go do a weekend. We're going to go to New York, then we're going to go to California, then we're going to rent an RV and drive to Texas. If the 2 of you are still friends and gelling after that, probably a good idea to partner up.
Yeah, no, I love the idea of traveling together. I believe one of your VP gigs was sourced through like a consulting engagement, or at least like a brief consulting engagement.
That was great.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So I know my head of sales gig was through initially consulting, and I feel like that is a really good hack that you can one know the skeletons that are in the closet for the business. Also know what it's like to work with the CEO, know what type of challenges that they bring up, their mindset. So I would say the minimum thing I would suggest if people are thinking about making a shift is go try to consult for some CEOs at some early stage startups. You'll learn really quickly if one, you can work with that person, and then two, if you even want that job in the first place, because it's a completely different job, completely different than being a sales manager. And if you can take it one step further, go to Mexico with them for a week. To your
Totally. No, the consulting piece is absolutely massive. And I think that is a really good way for somebody that, yeah, that organically, that's not how I set out to do it. I was looking at generating a revenue stream for myself.
yeah.
So I ended up before the pandemic, I think I had 4 companies working with me on quarterly or annual agreements or whatever. And one of the things, again, I think that was my first true exposure to managing up. And I think again, like one of the biggest things that we latch on to early in our careers is data is a really big one. It's like data is huge. Data is king. Prove it with data. And it doesn't even matter what somebody's like emotional thought process is around where we should go or what we should do. Throw data at it, and then it's going to give it's a map. Data is just a map. What's next? That's not always the case. And actually, I met a marketer a couple weeks ago who was very impressive. And she pulled out a statistic that only 21% of data is actually accepted at the highest leadership companies in all of business. So a lot of data is debunked or I don't believe that and so forth. So you have to understand the CEO or the board, whoever you're working with, what is it that resonates with them? And one of the things that I found really powerful for myself, and that's just because this is how I've always done things, but now it's become like almost the way we do things is it's always proof of concept. So listen, we're gonna do a sample set. We're gonna try it. If it works, it's double down.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the best ways that you can go about things with a CEO. The reason being is it's pretty scary being a CEO. Like I've never held that seat, but I have so much empathy for all the CEOs, especially early stage CEOs, where like one decision can make or break the whole business. So they're constantly trying to poke holes in things as they should to ensure that they're not just leading with a certain level of favoritism and be like, I think Evan's great. So we're always going to go with what he says. It's like, that's not their job,
Yeah.
but a lot of meat on the bone on that one for sure.
Yeah, no, limiting the risk and making it easier to say yes in a way that's low impact either way. And knowing that's okay because as long as you've had the conversation in the forefront that says this works, we can consider bringing it further from an implementation perspective. I think that's always been, in my experience, the right way to go about things. Sometimes I
Yeah.
do that and it just gets shut, which is
Well,
your point.
it's totally understandable. Managing capital, especially in these markets, is just, it's a scary thing, right? And everybody's trying to do their best job. But that said, you got to remember when you're a VP of sales or head of, there's probably 3 to 4 other individuals reporting to the CEO that are also asking for some capital to deploy for their projects. You got to empathize with your CEO that they're getting passed around their one-on-ones with the executive team. And it's just, I need 20 grand here. I need 40 grand here. We want to hire this person. We had budgeted 75 grand, but now the market's telling us we need 140 grand. So let's do it. It's an easy decision. And I think it's easy when you're on an executive team to think, oh, like, why is the CEO struggling with that? It's like, because that's not the only ask that's happening right now.
Yeah.
And then they've got a lot of pressure coming down on them. So there's a whole dynamic here. And I think, again, taking this full circle to the conversation around being in the early stages of your career going, oh, I need a BDR. If you can think about what your customer, in this case, CEO or your manager or your director, think about what they need. How do I make their life easier? How do I help them sleep at night? If you can do that, you won't, don't worry about the title. Don't worry about the pay. You will get upgraded. You'll get upgraded, but you got to stop thinking about, oh, I need this next role. I need that next role. That's exactly where my career progression should go. One of my favorite ones is I was always told that you needed to be an AE before you're a sales manager. I was never quote unquote an AE. I've always sold and still sell, but I was never an AE. So don't let anybody tell you that. And then I was never a director of sales before I was a VP. Now, everybody could argue my success until the cows come home for sure. The time will tell. The career pathing piece is getting debunked, I think, over and over again.
Yeah. No, love it. I think this is a perfect note to switch gears. I know on the Meeting Mastery podcast, we do is we ask sales leaders around what they specifically think AEs should be having on their calls from a best practice perspective. Curious, what's your take?
I think the biggest problem, and I think you'd agree with this, the biggest problem with sales, and you look at when we do pipeline reviews, is when a sales rep is really excited about a deal, but the prospect is at home or in their office, already written it off and not going to return an email. There's this massive misalignment. That's really where the majority of pipelines sits. It's, I'm really excited about this. I saw a ton of alignment. This is how we're going to help them A, B, and C. I quantified pricing. They loved it. Meeting with them next week. And then they don't show up. I think find myself always using my hands and doing this with reps when I'm talking to them is, do you have alignment or are you guys doing it? And sometimes you can notice it when you review a call with a sales rep. He's like, holy smokes, it's almost combative. There's almost a debate here when you're talking about the problems that you're trying to position yourself to solve for them. Instead, they're now trying to tell you it's not that big of a problem because you've struck a chord because it's very emotional for them, where they're now thinking that like you're challenging them. And in business, we all have egos. Everybody wants to say they don't have ego. It's bullshit. We all have egos. So the art form of sales is to get yourself into a world where your prospect is willing to have you tell them what you feel, but have them know that it's coming from a place of not trying to gain commissions or close a deal, but in order to help them. And that's what true alignment is. And that's the alignment of, hey, Ryan, okay, so you got pricing, you're going to get your proposal. We'll talk next week. That's not alignment. That's me dictating you what it is. Alignment is, Ryan, how do you feel about this? Do you think we can help solve your problems? Do you want to meet with me next week? Is it valuable to you? Yes. Fine. Great. And getting alignment to come to a decision rather than me just trying to force my agenda on you. So again, I'm talking alignment. You got to get that alignment with your prospective customer.
I think the biggest thing that allows you to do that effectively too, from my experience, is being okay if the answer is no to that.
Yeah.
If it's no, I don't see value, you need to truly be okay with that. I think where reps struggle is they don't have enough pipeline because they're not putting the effort in on the front end. And then they're getting desperate on their deals and they're trying to force things down a prospect's throat, which is never going to be received well. So couldn't agree more.
It's just so short-sighted because I want to bring a lot of deals to my offer people, but then you start buying into your own rhetoric and your own misconceptions of a deal. And I always tell sales reps, come to me with 5 to 10 deals that you have true alignment on, not 20 where half of that pipeline is false economic.
Yeah. Love it. Thanks so much for joining us today, Evan. Really appreciate your time and hope we'll chat soon. Thanks, everybody.
Appreciate it.